Okay, now we move into discussion time, and we have already got in the chat box 3 questions. Well, if the person asks a question would like to turn on the camera or the microphone to ask in person, please feel free to do that. So the first question is for Zhu Qiuwei by Chun Chun Ting. I wonder if Ting or Chun Chun would like to, ask your own question in your own voice. Okay. Otherwise, as we see it in the chat box, the question for Dr. Zhu is, would like to know how this constitute a bottom-up discourse of resistance. Does not it work perfectly with the developmentalist priority and anthropocentrism of capitalist thinking? So this question is for
yeah. Okay, yeah. Thanks for my colleague Zhen's question. So I guess that question depends on which films we are talking about. Because I honestly have to say that I still am trying to figure out how to actually summarize all my thoughts on all these different genres and all these different films that are made from different eras. But from say like one of the films which I haven't actually go into detail, like Wisely Bury Me High, a film from 1991. It is actually quite critical of the authoritarian, the fictitious of authoritarian regime, and it also represents feng shui as a mean to fight against the ruling power. But then in other films, particularly the more recent commercial films, we do actually see that feng shui runs more like a kind of tool that can be used between different parties. So it seems to me that in many of these films, the goodies and the baddies, particularly in these comedies, they are actually having their own ways to interpret feng shui in a way to shape the environment in a way that benefits them. So it's a kind of like a battle between the ones who can come up with a more convincing interpretations of how to interpret a place feng shui, and the one that who manages to do so would often be the one that benefits from their mean to shape the environment. But then another documentary which I haven't got a chance to talk about is Many Undulating Things, which I would also see it as a kind of good example in constituting a kind of bottom-up discourse of resistance in relation to feng shui, because the film it is actually a criticism towards British colonialism, and it also offers a kind of critique towards films like Love is a Many Splendid Thing, and it talks about how feng shui in the past were actually even though they are British white colonizers, they do actually occupy the places on above the peaks where there are better air circulation, and also what they also see as places with better feng shui. So it kind of suggests, and the documentary interestingly also shows us that in the present day, we still see a lot of these mid-level and high-end residential areas, which they claim to have better feng shui, are actually much more expensive areas, and they are still being populated by expats and also people of a higher social class. So that kind of critical stance towards viewing feng shui, it's a way of seeing how perhaps we can see it as a tool of resistance if we manage to go against the dominant understanding of the feng shui of the place, or if we manage to have a way to change the or find a way to occupy a space where there is better feng shui. So I guess, yeah, thanks. Yeah, that's my thoughts on these films. Thanks for the question.
Okay, thank you, Professor Chu. And the next question is for Winnie about Mông Mai Lan, Wu Mai Lan. I first heard it from, this question is from Rina. Okay, I first heard it from a friend to describe a hair color she wants to dye. That time, it is indeed a shock for me as someone lived in the worst smoggy days of Beijing. So how do you think about this kind of positive or natural way of using the term 霧霾, 霧霾 in this sense?
Okay, yeah, thank you, Rina, for this good question. For me, I would be very careful, when I look at, this kind of, I would consider them, as a mundanization, or naturalizations, of environmental issues. Because for me, it's somehow it's like, you try to internalize, the external problems and then treat them, as just passively, accept them, as part of the everyday. So in a way, it would, for me, it would just simply, lose the urgency to reflect on them or to act, actively, to them, in the everyday. But then, I want to suggest you, to read Jia Ruzhang's work, which I also quoted in my presentation. If you haven't read it before, I just put the title in the chat. Zhang, writes about the life outside the dome. She critically talks about how people chose, to practice Dai Ji Chuan, during the smog days, which considered by other people, as insane, as a grassroots response, to smog and to refuse, to be enveloped, by that fear, of scientism to her. So yeah, I think that, that would give you a really different kind of perspective in thinking in what way this kind of everyday practices can also be understood as a kind of microscopic resistance to these issues. Yeah, so I would leave it for you to think further on it. But for me, I would be very careful not to yeah, just to neutralize these issues just as part of the everyday.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Winnie. Winnie has also posted to everyone in the chat box on an article titled "Alive Outside the Dome." The next question is also for Winnie by Maxim, I think. Yes, and the question is, in your study, Winnie, of literary and film representations of air, did you also come across specific appreciations of smells as indicators of human relations with air? And in particular, polluted air. I was wondering if you found that breathing and singing are also closely linked to the sense of smell.
Thank you, Max. Max is actually a colleague at the Landscape Architecture, so he's very interested in today's conference. Well, thank you for that question. I think probably not in my examples. You won't find direct relations between smell. Well, in Chen Qiufan's work, actually there's a bit of smell there. When it is almost like unbreathable, outside without the mask on. But then I think a very good example is from Professor Yao Weiping's presentation from Folding Beijing. In Folding Beijing, there is a lot of mentioning about smell, which is associated with the worker, who has to work on, the waste and this really unprivileged conditions. So, and then, he is very aware of the smell, that how he smells, to other, and then how in the first place, it smells so good. So I think, that is a very good way, to engage, with air as well. So I would definitely, include that, in when I expand, the paper. Thank you, Max.
Okay. Actually, there's a third question for Winnie, but I think I will let Winnie take a short break and ask questions for other panelists first. We have questions from my colleague, Dr. Lok Wai Chao. And Casey's first question is for Enoch. The question is, can Enoch elaborate a bit more? Actually, I think, Casey, you are here. Why don't you ask your own questions to Enoch and Weiping in person? Casey, would you like to do that? Okay, if not, the question from Casey to Enoch is, asking him to elaborate a bit more on how sound ecology works in the films you have discussed. Are sounds just naturally captured or remixed to serve some other purposes? This is for Enoch.
Okay, thanks,
Thank you.
Howard, and thanks, Casey. I have 3 cases in my paper, and the first 2 cases, especially the first 2 cases, the purpose the purpose of these 2 cases, I would like to record the folk song, to preserve the folk song, to preserve the folk song that the director thinks they are, fading out or endangering. So basically, they just record as many as possible and as extensive as possible, even to ask those elderly ladies and fishermen to remember word by word and notes by notes. Sometimes old people cannot remember very clearly, and also because there are a lot of variation in the folk songs. So actually, for those 2 cases, actually they would like to use the song, or to record the song, to preserve the song, and especially for On Shan Yu Guo Ballet on the Shore. It's really an infographic and documentary that would like to preserve the song. And for Chen Houlong's and Chloe Lai's Rhymes of Shui Hao婆婆的山歌, and Chen Houlong and Chloe Lai use the song to match with some shots of landscape. Maybe this can be, what kind of remix to serve the purpose of, I would say, at the end of my presentation, the conclusion is the song, the purpose of mediation, through the song and also the visual landscape combined together as the ethnographic documentary, as a mediation to let us to confront the ecological rationality. So especially if you have any chance to watch the film, when the film play the song of the migration of birds, and then it's used some aerial shots, overhead shots flying over the landscape of Shui Hao Chun, and then to see the landscape, the shore, and then just like a bird flying over the place, and to enhance the affects, I would say, in the song. So basically, they would like to preserve the song, but of course they will use the visual asset to help us to receive the song more completely. I would say that.
Okay. Another question. Thank you, Enoch. Another question by Casey is for Wei Ping. Casey asks if you could explain how Anthropocene as affect emerges in Liu Cixin's novel, or maybe others' work as well. To whose does such affect belong?
Yeah, thanks very much, Casey, for the question. This is a very interesting question. The term affect is used in the sense developed by Chakrabarty in contradistinction to cognitive. So when we talk about issues to do with the Anthropocene, often we are puzzled by the huge temporal and spatial scales involved in the different processes. According to Chakrabarty, one of the things we can do is to try to look at art, whether it's visual or verbal, because art can help us to understand the Anthropocene effectively, in the sense that it is, what is happening is set in certain place at certain time, so you will be able to tie up the experiences, emotional, intellectual, and so on and so forth, in a more concrete manner. So in the case of Liu Cixin, the affect, just like other examples from literature, film, and other areas, affect is very often experienced by the reader or the viewer, the audience, vicariously through the characters involved there. So, for example, in the the trilogy, Remembrance of Things of Earth Past, the scientist, the central female character, Chang Xin, is able to live through actually 17 billion years, thanks to the novum nova, I mean, hibernation, so on and so forth. So you will be able to, I mean, at the end of the trilogy, for example, then I mean, everything ties up together in the sense that all the ecological crises dating back all the way to the Cultural Revolution will be condensed in a way that the reader will be able to feel the impact in more concrete manner. So this is right. So affect is used in this sense, developed by Chakrabarti to draw attention to the role that art can play in understanding and perhaps developing strategies of resistance in the age of the Anthropocene. I hope this answers the question.
Okay. A second question is also for Wei Ping from Jessica, my colleague Yang Wei Yi. Jessica, are you online? I mean, would you like to turn on the microphone and ask a question yourself? Yeah, good to see you.
Yeah, it's not from me. The question is from her. She is called Espresso. I call her Easy.
Okay. Beautiful cat.
I just translate her question because she only speaks Maoist. So
Maoist.
the question is, I just wonder. Okay, we just wonder why, whether the exploration of the Anthropocene in the text Wei Ping was working on, and whether he noticed any similar exploration in other contemporary Chinese literature, because I find the use of or the representation of people and land and nature and time so very different in the text he describes and the more mainstream Chinese literature we know better about.
Yeah, thanks very much, Jessica, for the question. I think there are definitely connections between science fiction and other endeavors in Chinese culture, contemporary Chinese culture. For example, I think there are, I mean, some of the tropes shared by both science fiction writers and writers of literature, I mean, in other areas of Chinese literature. For example, the use of the female figure as a symbol of exploitation, suffering, oppression, so on and so forth, as can be seen, for example, in the novel by Chen Xifan and Huang Chao, for example, the central female figure, Mimi, is presented as an embodiment of the toxic consequences of overconsumption in global capitalism, as I tried to present. As I tried to argue in the presentation. So, I mean, this trope of a female figure as a victim is actually a very common feature in Chinese culture. Then, what is interesting about Chen Xifan's work is that because of this proximity to and thus contamination by technology, the central character Mimi is turned into a cyborg, which enabled her to lead a rebellion against the exploiters. Then what is important is that there's no perfect solution to the problems presented, because there's actually an ongoing dialogue, a quarrel, if you like, between the two selves that come as a consequence of this contamination. So Mimi is always arguing with herself about what is happening. I mean, some of the things happening actually are beyond her comprehension. So technology, which, as I argued in the presentation, is one of the things that support the biosphere, what Chakrabarti calls a technosphere. So technosphere is something that is both innate but also troubling in the sense that it has no predetermined outcome. I think this is one of the things that comes out particularly striking in Chen Xifan's work. And this is actually, I mean, I'd like to get back to the question precise about the high-speed rail earlier this morning. So, I mean, technology is something that can be put to very, very different purposes, different uses, depending on the actors, the agents involved there. So, I mean, this is actually the actually this also I think relates to the question about Professor Zhu's discussion about the form of agencies that is bottom up as opposed to top down. So I think it is important that we try to pay more attention to the different resources, different available to us. That I mean, both. Talis was talking about the very interesting interaction between state, non-state, and so on and so forth. So I mean, all of these different resources and forms of agency are available. That they are also subject to manipulation. Different processes involving very, very different actors. So I think what is interesting about Chen Qifan's work is that you get this open process of negotiation going on. I've tried to juxtapose the three works I discussed today in an attempt to create a frame of reference. Actually, to try to respond to what Chakrabarty is trying to say by talking about the deep conscious, the epochal consciousness of anthropology, i.e., we need both forms of agency. I mean, the homo on one hand and the anthropos on the other, because we need to be aware of the unintended, very often unpredictable outcomes created by collective action. But at the same time, let's not forget that we can do something. I mean, every one of us can do something about this collective outcome that is created by humanity as a species. So try to look at the different works so as to try to create links and connections. I mean, none of the works I discussed offers a perfect solution, but by practice, as Jessica suggested just now, by thinking about the processes, the problems in an inspiring context, perhaps we can come up with something interesting. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Wai Ping. I would like to take this chance to introduce to you a forthcoming book series to be published by the publisher Brill. And this series is titled African and Asian Anthropocene, Studies in the Environmental Humanities. I've put actually the URL on the chat box so that you can click on to take a look at that. And in fact, one of our presenters today, Winnie, also serves in the editorial board, as you can see here. And so here, there's a question, an early question for Winnie, and that is, actually two questions by Pete. The first is that I find that the critique you quote in Cai Jing's work interesting. The critique revolves around the way Cai told the story, scientific gaze, objectifying problem solution. However, the documentary also hinged upon her role as a mother, which she said was one of the major motivations for producing the documentary, giving the documentary a personal and emotional touch. I'm just curious about how you will respond to the critique you quote. And the second question by Pete is also just like Cai's use of her role as a parent in her documentary. Jia Zhangke also uses a lot of footage depicting parents worrying about her kids suffering from respiratory diseases. Could you talk more about the element of family in storytelling related to environmental problems in China?
Okay, thank you so much, for the great questions. I think, Cai Jing definitely, is very smart, in using her personal family issues as an entry point, to draw the attentions of the audience. So that's why, the the video went viral, overnight.
Mhm.
But then for me, what is problematic is the way that, this idea of framing, her relationship, with the problems. So somehow, the problem is outside of her, that she's the victim, so is her daughter. But then, it doesn't help us to really reflect, on everyone's responsibility in ruining, the environment that, we have to suffer, from it right now. And then in relation, to your second question is about this idea of family, which I think is also prominent in Cai Jing's work, which is also problematic to me, is this class issue. I mean, definitely, she is totally different, from the girl that she interviewed, in the video, which somehow, if you remember, at the end, at the middle, of the video, when after, the girl grew up, she needs help, and then Cai Jing just miraculously, help her to solve the question, and then things go away. So there is that kind of discrepancy, about class and family, that. So who is being more privileged, in this kind of environmental crisis? And then, when I look at particularly, the documentary film scene, if you think of your family, represented in Cai Jing's work or in Smoke Journeys, by Jia Zhangke, is a very well protected middle-class family, well, at least, is a well-off, family, and that is surrounded, by lovable, parents. But then if you look at like Wang Bing's Three Sisters, or Wang Jiuliang's Plastic China, you see, the family system is actually dismantling, because of urbanization, because of these environmental issues that, they have just to be left behind and then suffer, from the kind of waste, that we human beings, created. So I think that kind of class issues, which is also reflected in Chen Qiufang, in the short story that I mentioned, I mean, it's really the kind of issues that needs to be raised in relation, like to Rob Nixon's discussion about the environmentalism of the poor, that, the poor people actually suffered more in this whole crisis, but then they are left unheard of, in this whole discourses. So I hope that, there's a brief, answer, to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Winnie. Well, that brings to the conclusion of our second panel today. We have 4 minutes beyond the scheduled time. Too bad. My apology for both Professor Zhu and Enoch, that we didn't really have the time for you to show more examples and the sound clips. And I don't know if we still have the chance this afternoon at the end of the day. And also we remind everybody that starting at 3:30 this afternoon, 3:30, we'll have our last panel today. The title is Governmentality and China's Ecological Civilization, which will be monitored by my colleague Jessica. So, and stay tuned. We'll see each other again in less than 2.5 hours. Yeah, thank you, everybody. Thank you, my panelists. Thanks all the questions, Casey, Jessica, and all the attendants, our audience. Thank you very much. So we'll be back later in the afternoon. Thank you. Bye-bye.